This conference will now be recorded.
But yes, so anyone, any questions, guys, before we get started? Anyone, anything that I can answer, anything that I can take before we can get started with with today's session? Anyone, anything? Okay, so today we will look into one more concept called as virtual machines. So before I get started with that, guys, did anyone hear about this terminology called virtual machines? And if yes, then what do you really understand by that? What exactly do you mean by something called as a virtual machine, or in short, something called VM? Did anyone anytime come across this particular terminology out here?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So the virtual machine basically takes the underlying hardware resources
Okay.
and run on a hypervisor,
Okay.
right? So you can deploy application or operating system on that
Mm-hmm.
like a physical machine. So it is
Okay.
virtual in nature. You
Okay.
have a compute, disk, and everything network are all virtual. So
Mm-hmm.
those are basically instantiation of your hardware.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else? So I'll also kind of, yes, that's completely precise on what exactly a virtual machine really means out here. But anyone else on at a, let's say at a very ground level out here as such? Okay, so let's get started then. For those who are not especially familiar with the understanding of what really virtual machine is, let's say this. See, let's say that you are a business called irctc.co.in. You are a business, you want to get started, and you want to create this particular application called irctc.co.in out here as such. Now, what would you do rather, or what would you do in order to get started with this? Is that you need some kind of a platform to host this particular code that is responsible for the application. Now, application is nothing but a piece of code, right? In the background, there's a piece of code, and this piece of code needs to be hosted somewhere. And that's where, in the very first class, when we were doing introduction, that's where we are telling that we have something called as a server in place. So there is something called as a server, and on top of the server, I can host this code directly. This is purely an on-premise model, wherein I have to maintain the server. It's my responsibility to upgrade the hard drive. There are multiple softwares, of course, running on top of the server, and I have to maintain all these servers out here and so on and so forth. So what really happens right now is that if I have a user who who's trying to, let's say, access my application called irctc.co.in, the request will go to a backend running server somewhere in my data center. The server will process the request. The server has some physical attributes like the hard drive, the RAM, the CPU, processing units. So it's just like a computer. Now, if you look at your laptops, you'll have all these properties like the RAM, the hard drive, the processing, the processor, and all that stuff, right? In the same way, even a server has all these things, and using all the underlying capabilities like the RAM, the CPU, and etc., it can process your request. When I say process your request, it can understand what the user is requesting for and send back the code in the form of an application that you can, let's say, use. So you can go and do your ticket bookings and all these things out here as such. This is a very simple model. I mean, it's not as simple as it looks like, because I have to buy the server, and also there is an issue with something called scalability, meaning I cannot increase my capacity or decrease my capacity the way I wish to. There are a couple of problems if you go with a purely on-premise model. There is a lot of capital expenditure that you have to spare here, meaning you have to invest money not in just hundreds of rupees. It's actually in lakhs of rupees that you have to invest to buy a server and let's say maintain it and so on and so forth. But alternatively, what you can do is that since we are already using Azure, you can request for something called as a virtual machine service in Azure, a VM, virtual machine. A virtual machine, a virtual machine service is a abstraction of the underlying server. What do I mean by this? What do I mean by this particular term called abstraction of the underlying server? It's very simple. Whenever you create a virtual machine, Microsoft is going to ask you that, okay, fine, you know what? If you are creating a virtual machine out here, can you tell me which region you want to, let's say, run this particular virtual machine? And let's say I take a region called ECS2. I'll just remove the code right now. So I'll take an example of a region called ECS2. So what Azure is going to do is that Azure is going to, let's say, look for a physical server that is running in ECS2, one of the physical servers that is actually running in ECS2 out here, and it will run this virtual machine as a piece of software which represents this physical hardware in the cloud. This is called as an abstraction. This is known as an abstraction out here. So this machine is just going ahead and representing that particular underlying server, and in order to do this, there is something called as a hypervisor or a hyper-V as a software installed on top of this particular server. Hypervisor, which will very simple, which will simply do one thing. Okay, let me put this name in a proper way. Which will simply do one thing. It will allow the virtual machine to efficiently and effectively use the underlying properties like the RAM, hardware, software, CPU, and all that stuff. Now, the point here is that using one such particular physical server, there can be multiple virtual machines that can be hosted. Not just one, there can be multiple pieces of software. Now, virtual machine is nothing but a piece of software that is running on top of, let's say, a backend physical server out here. So, there is a physical server, but right now, I am not maintaining this particular physical server, nor am maintaining the software called hypervisor that is running on top of the physical server. This is not my responsibility, nor I am maintaining the networking at a physical server level or at a data center level. All this is taken care by the cloud provider. All this is now taken care by the cloud provider out here. But I will still, or I am still, as a business, responsible to deliver my code. Meaning, I am still responsible to go and develop and deliver the code. But what I'll now do is that since I do not have the access to the physical server, I will put my code on top of the virtual machine. So I have the virtual machine running in Azure. It's the same, meaning it's just an abstraction of the physical server. Now I'll just take my code and put it on top of the virtual machine that is running on, let's say, Azure. And now this is what happens. I, as a user, am requesting for this particular website called irctc.co.in. The request internally is diverted to, let's say, this particular virtual machine running with some IP address out here. We'll talk about that. This virtual machine will request for the underlying physical server for all this particular, let's say, properties like RAM, hardware, and etc. from for processing the request. This gives the server gives it the hardware, the required hardware to process it. It processes your request and sends you back the application. In the earlier model, if you observe, the request was directly coming down to, let's say, this particular physical server out here in an on-premise model. But in a cloud delivery model, I am using a simple piece of software in the background called a virtual machine, and I am hosting all my code on this particular virtual machine so that the request is served back to the user out here as such. This is the model of operation. Now, the advantages of this, biggest advantage is cost cutting. See, firstly, I don't have to, let's say, buy the server, which means that I'm avoiding lakhs and lakhs of rupees out here. Cost is efficiently cut down. Like, the amount of cost that you actually cut down when you go for a cloud model is huge. Scalability. Let's say that I created a virtual machine and initially I took a RAM of around 2 GB, and this is not sufficient for my application. My application probably needs around 20 GB. I can simply go ahead and increase or request for an increase in the capacity. It'll just take like about 2 or 3 minutes to increase the same capacity for me. Or if I want to decrease the capacity the other way around too, I can also do that. The amount of decrease in the capacity is also possible, which means cost, scalability, and also the uptime 24 bar 7, depending upon, I mean, there are SLAs basically that are offered by Microsoft. Depending upon the way you create the machine, the SLA is also offered accordingly. So it's now telling that, okay, fine, you know what, this is the service level agreement that I'm giving you. This is, let's say, the maintenance that I'm giving you, and so on and so forth. And you just pay by the hour. So imagine that I created a virtual machine today. This is going to cost me around 6 or 7 rupees per an hour. I used it for about 5 hours and then I deleted the machine. So the cost is going to be calculated per the hour, and Microsoft is going to deduct that particular cost per an hour out here as such. So this is the model. This is the working model that I'm proposing. Is that I can host applications. I can not only host applications, I can convert my virtual machine into different things. Like I can convert the virtual machine into an Active Directory server, hosting the entire Azure Active Directory. I can convert this machine into a DNS server, or I can convert this machine into a fax server. I can convert this machine into a build server. So it's for a universal purpose. And one of the major purposes that we use this for is application hosting. And that's what I really want to go into. And that's what I would be, let's say, starting into. But before that, I would, just go ahead and see how the machine is really created, and what are the components that we need to really take care of, and what are the things that we need to understand to create this machine, and so on and so forth. So yes, this is just the, let's say, the theory of what really virtual machine is. So before I get started with the creation, any questions that I can really answer out here before we move forward?
The scalability applies to hard drive and CPU network as well. It does not, right? I mean,
Scalability.
you cannot on the fly. We cannot do it.
When you say scalability applies to hard drive, CPU, and the network, what exactly do you mean by that? Can you
So
please
on the fly,
elaborate a
when
little?
the VM is
Mhm.
running, can I increase
Okay.
or decrease the disk size, or add or remove the CPUs?
Add
And
or remove the CPUs on the fly? Yes, you can do that. Increase or decrease the hard drive? You can still do it on the fly, but it is not recommended to do it. You have to stop your machine in order to, let's say, go ahead and increase or decrease it. But yes, if you want to add additional compute memory in the form of CPUs, that is something that you can do on the fly.
yeah, CPU, if you want to add it, I mean, do you want to select the predefined instance already, or can we do it manually also? Let's say I
Mhm.
want a customized number, for example, 16 or 20 GB of RAM and 4
Mhm.
core CPU, something like that.
Okay. Okay.
So
No,
can I
you
do
cannot
that
do that.
in Azure? Okay.
No, you
I need
cannot
to choose.
customize it. Yes,
I
you
need
need
to
to
choose.
choose from the
Okay.
predefined, or you need to choose from the offering out here. We'll
So
talk
in
about that.
that case,
Look at that.
yeah, in that case,
That case. Mhm.
increase or decrease the CPU, I need to choose the appropriate instance type, right? So in that case,
Correct.
I cannot do it on the fly, right?
See, when you mean on the fly, all you mean is
Running,
that you want your machine to be
running.
running and you still want to increase it out.
Yeah,
Yes, you can do that. You don't have to stop your machine. I don't
you can
see a
change the
reason why
instance
you.
type. Okay.
Yes, you can change the instance type. Yes, you don't have to
Okay.
really stop your machine when if you want to, let's say, increase the capacity out here as such for the
Okay.
scalability of such as such out there.
Mhm. Okay.
Yes. Any more
It's
questions,
a
guys?
general question. It's a
Go ahead,
general
please.
question,
Okay.
just for understanding. I'm asking.
Hmm.
So when and why we use the creating these virtual machines, and when we use these virtual machines in the cloud.
When and why? So, firstly, when to answer that particular question, or for example, okay, let me take the why component of it. Why do you use the virtual machine out here? Just to the sheer benefit of ignoring the physical service for anything, for hosting your applications or for processing something. Let's say, for example, you have tons and tons of data. You want to process that particular data. Just giving you an example out there. You need some kind of a platform which offers you compute memory. Meaning, if you want to do a simple calculation, in my case, if I want to do a simple calculation, I'll open my calculator, do something. Even if I do a simple calculation, there is some RAM that I'm, let's say, actually consuming around, which means that I have a physical platform, which is my local laptop. That is my investment. And I'm able to, let's say, go ahead and do my simple calculations. In the same way, I want to now look at things from a business perspective. I want to host my applications, or I want to, let's say, go ahead and create something like a DNS server or an Active Directory server, something like that. In that cases, I would just go ahead create something called as a virtual machine and do all my, let's say, work on that particular virtual machine out here. And probably if I want it, I can go ahead and, let's say, delete this out at a later point in time. That is the why. When, depending upon the requirement that you have out here. If, let's say, you have an application called IRCTC which needs to be running 24 by 7, the when question is that I want this virtual machine to be 24 by 7 out here. When do you want to create a new instance of the virtual machine is when, let's say, this virtual machine is not really sufficient for you to host your application. I can create one more instance of this particular virtual machine, or I can create one more copy of this particular virtual machine and host my application onto a different virtual machine out here as such. That is the when component of it. So firstly, why, this the why, and when just depends purely upon the requirement that you do have. Depending upon that, you can go ahead and, let's say, create your machines and destroy your machines accordingly. Does that answer your question, Ramakrishna, if I'm not wrong?
Yeah, so we are thinking that virtual machine is different, and server level is different. So if you want to host something, or if you want to maintain our business data, day-to-day data, then that is different, like server level. We'll create a servers, and there we will install our applications like Oracle, whatever it may be, database or
Mm-hmm.
applications. And in that servers we maintain, normally organization will maintain all those business data in that servers.
Mm-hmm.
And
But what
if
if you want to avoid server? What if you want to do? I mean, when you say you're maintaining things at a server level,
Hmm,
you need to buy a server.
yes.
But what if I don't want to buy a server but still want a business out here?
Yeah, so basically, on premises, the databases are different. Now, whatever we are maintaining on premises, then we are renting it, or we are configuring that on the cloud, because
Yes,
various service providers are there in the cloud. They can provide the service. And
correct.
so small virtual machines like laptop or desktop kind of configuration, we can customize it, as you said in the
Mm-hmm.
theory. We can customize it, and whatever like RAM and all, we can configure our desktop kind of
Setup,
mission
yes,
setup in
yes.
the virtually only, with a lot of service providers they are providing, like RAM, CPU, memory, everything. So I'm a little bit confused even in my earlier as well. Like, when we create these desktops,
Okay.
that is my actual question. It's not.
Desktops normally, when you have multiple employees, you don't want to, let's say, purchase so many machines for your employees out here. You don't want, or you don't really want to go ahead and, let's say, purchase high powered machines for your employees. you can go ahead and let's say create virtual machines and ask them to connect to those virtual machines out here. For example, let's say I'm doing some kind of an AIML operation, and the machine demands a lot of capacity, or the machine demands a lot of RAM basically in order to process all these requests. And let's say even if I have the money to purchase, I cannot really go to a market and buy, let's say, something like a 64 core machine out here.
Correct.
I cannot do that because it's physically very challenging and physically very demanding out here to produce such a kind of a machine out here. In those cases, we can go for a virtual world, set up a desktop out here, and help our employees to go ahead and let's say do what they want to do, process the information, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
Yes, any more questions, guys?
So, Kiran, as a DevOps engineer, in your experience, work like
Mhm.
creating the virtual machines, desktop, not on the server level. Anyway, server level, it's organization level, data maintenance. Small virtual
Okay.
machines for our needs, as you said. Is it like our task as a DevOps engineer? We used to do this activity.
Yes, our task as a DevOps engineer, yes, depending upon the requirement, yes, we not only create, we also maintain these machines, monitor these machines, and if need be, automate these machines, like the automation of creation or automation of, let's say, start of the machine or shutdown of the machines is something that we as DevOps engineers, or we as, let's say, the DevOps engineering team, we take care of this one.
Oh, it's our regular activity as a DevOps engineer.
Provided if your organization is going for virtual machine service, yes, it would be a regular activity for us as a DevOps engineer out here.
But it's not related to the DBA, right? DBA is different. DBA
And
kind of
DBA is
activity.
different, yes. That's DBA kind of activities is completely different. So that's something which doesn't fall under our, let's say, purview.
Okay, I'm asking so many questions and stuff.
No problem. Anyone else? Any more questions, guys? Anyone? Any more questions with the theory part of the virtual machine? If that's clear, then we can go ahead and we can understand how to create a virtual machine and what to do while you're creating, what are the things that you need to take care of while creating, and so on and so forth. So coming to the creation of the virtual machine, the very first thing that I want to say is that if you want a virtual machine, sorry, if you need a virtual machine to be created, the very first thing that you need to have is your own private network, or I'm calling this as a virtual network. So I'm telling, okay, fine, you need your own private network, which will give you some kind of a logical isolation on the cloud. So nothing, a virtual network is doing nothing, but it's just giving you a space, your own space on the cloud. And within this particular space, you need to go ahead and create a subnet, dividing your network. Let's say at least one subnet out here. So within that particular space, you're creating a subnet. So let's do that. Let's go to the virtual networks. I don't have one today, so I'll just go ahead and create this out. And once I'm creating, I will go ahead and say this is virtual machine RG, something like this. I'll say okay. I'll just scroll down. I'll say this is a demo network. I'll say the network is an ECS2. Again, very importantly, both the network and the machine both have to be in the same region. You cannot have your machine running in a different region integrated with a network that is there in a different region out here. This is just something which is not possible. So I'll say, okay, fine, this is good enough. I'll say IP addresses. I'm taking the default IP address, which is 10.0.0.0/16, and the default subnet out here, which is 24. And once I have this, I'll just go ahead, review, and create this out. So I have a virtual network, and I am just creating one subnet inside this particular virtual network. And once this is created, I'll just go ahead and start creating my virtual machine service. So let's understand how to create the virtual machine service. And the virtual machine as a service gets created within the network. It gets created within your own private network out here. So virtual network is that particular resource which comes under or which falls under the boundaries of your network, which means that only users which are or only users or only applications which are part of this particular network can connect to it. I'll elaborate on this, on who can, who cannot connect to it, and how can they connect to it, and etc. But first, let's go ahead, create the machine, and let's understand what are the components of the machine, so that we can dig into it, and we can understand how can someone connect to it, how can someone not connect to it, and so on and so forth. So the network is created. I have the network that has, which is the demo network that I have, and I also have the resource group, which is virtual machine RG. Uh, Once this is in place, I'll just go here and I'll say virtual machines. I'll just look for virtual machines out here, and it's telling me, okay, fine, there are no virtual machines to display. Do you want to create one? I'll say yes, I want to create one. I'll just go ahead and say create a new Azure virtual machine out here as such. So I'll say create a new Azure virtual machine. It's saying, okay, fine, you have a host of operating systems that you can use and so on and so forth. But let's scroll down. Firstly, it's asking me for the subscription, the very basic details, and the resource group. So I'll take this is the resource group as virtual machine RG. This is the resource group that I'll take. And after that, it's asking me for the instance details. And here it is telling me what is the virtual machine name. So I'll just give a name called demo VM or first VM, whatever it is. And I am creating the machine in a region called ECUS2. I'll just scroll down. I'll just ignore these two options for now, which is availability options and the security type. I'll go with the default. We'll come back to it and understand what really availability options really are out here as such. I'll just scroll down. And now it's asking me, okay, fine, you're creating a virtual machine. Great. Can you tell me what is the operating system that I need to install? When I say I need to install, what is the operating system that Microsoft will, kind of install out here while creating this machine out here as such? And the operating system here is termed as something called as an image. Is termed as something called as an image out here. So I'll just go here and I'll just see all images. And here, if you look at this, this is called as a marketplace, wherein it is telling you, you know what, I have multiple images to offer. Microsoft has multiple images to offer by different third-party vendors. A lot of things are integrated out here, starting with something like Windows server-based operating system for completely business case operating systems out here. And if I click on select, again you have multiple servers out here like Windows 2020 to Windows 2019, 16, 17, all the way back to, let's say, Windows 2012. The last 10 years of servers are, let's say, being maintained and being hosted. And then you have the Windows home operating system like Windows 10, Windows 11. Or if you want to go for a Linux flavor, then you have something like Ubuntu. You have something like Fedora, Cent. A lot of operating systems out here, Red Hat, and a lot of things out here as such. Or if you want to or if you want to host something like a SQL database, even that is available. You can host your entire SQL database onto this particular server. What I'll do is I'll start with a simple operating system right now, and I'll say I want something like a Windows Server 2019 data center generation 2. I'm telling I need a 2019 server operating system. It's not a home operating system. It's a server which will help me do like application hosting and all that stuff. Application hosting, I can convert this into a DNS server, a lot of things out here. So I'm going for a server level operating system, and it's saying, okay, fine, the VM architecture is a 64-bit. The AMD processor is not really supported in this kind of an architecture. I'll say, okay, I'm good with that. And I'll just scroll down. And here it's asking me for something called as the size of the machine. It's telling me, okay, fine, you want to create the machine, great. Can you tell me what kind of a machine size that you need? And this is where the question came in, is that can I go ahead and select my own sizes? No, not really. There are predefined sizes out here. There are predefined sizes. You cannot, let's say, customize this out. There are predefined sizes that are available from which we can, or from which we are forced to go ahead and let's select this out. Now, in here, let's see, there is something like a DS2 V3, a D series machine. which offers you two vCPUs. When I say vCPUs, virtual CPUs out here. Just go to a market, just go to a shop, ask for a laptop. The first thing the shopkeeper is going to ask you is what is a processor. You will sorry, you'll ask the processor that okay, sorry, you'll ask the shopkeeper that what kind of a processors are there in the market. Can you just explain me a little bit of them? And he'll be like, it's i3 two core CPUs, or it's i3 four core, quad core, octa core processor, and all these things. I'm sure you would have heard it even in your phones, right? They would say it's an octa-core chipset, and so they would say it's an octa-core chipset, and so on and so forth. All they're telling is that there are two engines in the background, or there are two CPUs in the background, which can take your requests parallelly. It can take two requests parallelly out here and process it out in the same second. So this is what the CPUs really mean. They are your processing powers. They are your processing capacities out here. And how fast or how slow your machine is usually depends on a combination of the CPU and the RAM that you have in the background. And Microsoft here offers a host of options, like as small as, let's say, one CPU machine, to as large as I've also seen, like around 1,000 CPU machines also. This is what I've also seen out here. And it's a combination that I cannot change. I cannot say, I need let's say a 2 and 4 combination. I cannot do that. If I want to do that, I need to change the series of my machine, two virtual CPUs and let's say 4 GB of RAM and so on and so forth. For example, let's say if you take something like a DS2 series and just scroll down, the cost that you incur per a month would be around 5,000 rupees per a month is what you pay if you leave this machine running 24 by 7 into 30 days. This is the cost they are estimating. It's an estimated cost. Of course, if you scale it up, or let's say if you increase the number of instances and so on and so forth, the cost of course really changes. This is an estimated cost. If you just don't do anything to the machine, just keep it running for let's say about 24 by 7 to 30 days, use the same capacity, you're going to incur a charge of about let's say 5,000 rupees out here. So saying okay, fine. This is the machine, 2 core 8 GB RAM. I'll talk about what are the disks and IOPS and all these things, but for now I'll say okay, fine, select this out. This is the size I'm selecting. And just a heads up guys, if you are using a free trial subscription, you will not see so many options out here. You probably won't see so many options. You would see limited options, and also not all the regions support the creation of virtual machines. There are limited regions like Central US, East US, West US 3, North Central US are a couple of regions that I have, let's say, seen this. So please select those regions which will allow you for virtual machine creation out here as such. In my case, I'm not using a free trial. I have a professional subscription, and East US2 is one of the regions that is allocated to me so that I can go and create these out. So that's the reason I'm going in and creating these machines in East US2. But in for your practice purpose, please make sure to choose a region like East US and please choose the size that is available in your subscription out here as such. So I'll just scroll down, and as and when I scroll down, sorry, sorry, as and when I scroll down, since this is a Windows machine, it's asking me, can you please go ahead give your user credentials? Can you make sure to give your user ID and the password out here, initial user ID and password? So I'll say, okay, fine. You know what? Let me go ahead, give me something called as test user. I'll just give something like this, and I'll just give a password here, and I'm reconfirming the password. And once this is done, there is something called as inbound rules. Super important. This defines who can connect to your machine and who is not allowed to connect to your machine, and how can they connect to your machine out here as such. We'll talk about it in a minute. For now, what I'll do, I'll just go ahead and I'll say inbound rules are none. I'll block all the inbound rules. We'll talk about what really inbound rules are and so on and so forth. I'll just block all these things right now. We'll talk about what are inbound rules in a separate session. So I'll block this out. I'll just scroll down. It's asking me, do you have already a license that you can use here? Did you purchase a server licensing earlier? I say no, I do not really have a server licensing. I'll just go ahead and say disks. to hold my data. So in the very first page, I selected what is my RAM. The second, sorry, in the second page, I'm selecting what is the storage in which I need to, let's say, save my data and so on and so forth. For which Microsoft is now telling that, you know what, I will give you something called as a premium SSD disk, a premium solid state drive SSD disk out here for your OS, meaning for your operating system. If you want to install your operating system, this is where your operating system will be installed. This is something that I will control. This is something I will control, but you can, of course, tell me whether you want a premium here or whether you want a standard SSD or a standard HDD hard drive. I'll just go for the premium, a recommended option out here. And if you see, you have something called as a locally redundant storage, LRS, which means the data that you copy inside this particular disk is replicated thrice inside the same data center out here as such. So you get the replication as well whenever you go for the disk out here. And, and this is for your operating system. Additionally, if you just scroll down, you can also add data disks for your VM. Like you're getting a C drive. Now Microsoft is telling, okay, fine, you know what? Do you probably need a D or do you need an E? Do you need an F drive? Do you need something like this? You can in this page go ahead and say, you know what, yes, I need a disk. You can say create and attach a new disk here. You can say this disk name is something like D drive. And you can say what is the capacity of this disk. All the way from 4 GB to 32,767 GB is what you can really select. You can have as small as 4, as large as 32,000 GB out here, depending upon what kind of an operations that you need to do. For now, I'll just go ahead and select a 1 terabyte hard drive, which is 1024. I'll say okay. I'll say okay, I'm good with this. It's saying okay, fine, this is good. Or this is one of the disks that you get created. And if I were to ask Microsoft that okay, fine, you know what, I have a D drive. Can I add an F drive? Can I add an E drive? And the question that I'm really posing Microsoft here is that how many drives that I can really go for? Microsoft says it depends upon the size that you select. I will say okay, fine, cancel. I'll just go to the previous window. And this is what it tells you, that depending upon the size, in my case I selected somewhere like D2S V3. It's telling you can have a maximum of 4 data disks out here. You can have around 4 data disks out here with different capacities. There is no maximum capacity that you can, let's say, there is no maximum capacity at which each and every disk is capped at. You can but have a maximum of 4. In my case, I've already added 1 data disk, so I can add more 3 out here as such. It completely depends upon the size of the machine or the series of the machine that you really go for out here. So I'll say great. I'll just come here. I'll say select. I'll say next disks. I'll say this is the D drive. I'll say this is the D drive. And then next here comes the networking. It's telling you know what? Yes. When you create a machine, I will provision this machine within your network. You have a network. If you don't have, you can create a network here. You can directly go ahead and create a virtual network out here. But if you do have, well and good, you can go ahead and select this particular network out here. And I will create this particular machine within the boundaries of your network. I cannot create it outside the boundary. Just like a storage account or just like any other service, you cannot create a machine outside your network. You have to create a machine inside your network, which means that you will need a, let's say, a private network already provisioned. Or if you don't have it, you can go ahead and while creating the machine, you can create this particular network, saying this is a virtual network, this is a subnet, and it's telling, do you want a public IP for this particular machine? For now, what I'll do is I'll say, you know what, I don't need a public IP. I'll say none. I don't want a public IP right now. I'll just scroll down. I'll just choose the default options out here. And from here, I'll just say review and create. So I'm just going with all the default options in management. I'll come back to what management really talks about and so on and so forth. But for now, what I'm but for now, what I'm doing is I've selected these three tabs. I said what is my basics, wherein I said what is the size of the machine, what is the account that, what is the user account of the machine, what are the number of disks, and what is the networking of this particular machine. And I just go ahead and hit the create button out here as such. So I'm selecting all these three things. I'm telling what are the number of drives that I need and so on and so forth. And then I went ahead and said create. Now it is initializing a deployment, which means that it's making a request to the backend servers of Azure, telling that the user is requested, or the user is now requesting to go ahead and create a server or create a virtual machine. Sorry, can you please allocate a backend server for this particular virtual machine? And can you please create all the components for this particular machine? Microsoft says yes, I would definitely do that. And now Microsoft says, okay, fine. Let me go ahead and start provisioning the particular virtual machine out here. But before that, let me check whether you have the virtual network or not. So Microsoft says, okay, fine, you know what, you have the virtual network, you have the subnet of the virtual network. Now let me go ahead and create one of the most important components before the virtual machine is actually created. You have one of the most important components of the virtual machine called as a network interface card, as a NIC card. We call it as a NIC, or you can simply call it as a network interface card out here as such, an IC card. A network interface card out here as such. What does it really do? A network interface card is primarily responsible for the communication of the machine, which means even your laptop, even any device that you use, right? It has its own communication card. It has its own network interface card out here. This is primarily responsible to make sure the machine gets connected to, let's say, your network, like a router or a Wi-Fi, whatever it is, and allow it to communicate to the outside world and also receive communication from the outside world. So I'm telling to and from. And for all this to happen, you need something called as a network interface card. So the network interface card is created, and this card is attached to your subnet. So I created a subnet with 256 IPs when I created it out. But the actual, we know that it is 256 minus 5, which is 251 IPs that are available. And what it does right now is that since a network interface card is being attached to this particular subnet, the subnet out of the available pool of 251 gives one IP to the network interface card. It tells you, or it takes that particular IP. Here the number of IPs are going to get 250, and this network interface card will receive a private IP address. This is the address within the network wherein your network interface card now resides. And then later you have something called as a virtual machine that gets created. I mean, there are other components that we'll talk about. The virtual machine that's get created, and this virtual machine is attached to your network interface card, and then there is something called as the disk of the virtual machine, like OS disk and the operating system. Sorry, the OS disk and the operating system disk that gets created. These two are attached. The OS disk and the data disk, I'm sorry. These two are now attached to your virtual machine out here as such. So now you have a network, you have a subnet. Subnet is getting attached to the NIC card. NIC card is getting attached to the VM. VM internally is having, let's say, those disks out here that we are talking about. So if you look at this, it is deployed it out. And if you just expand the resource creation model, right? You just scroll down from the bottom. You have the drive, you have the network interface card. So you have the network interface card, you have the VM itself getting created. And if you go inside the resource group, and these are all the resources that gets created. So I'll just group them by type. I'll say group them by type here. And this is going to tell you what are all there. So you have an OS disk, you have your D drive that got created, you have something called as a network interface card, you have something very important called network security group rule, which I have not introduced, which I'll take that. Then you have the virtual machine, and earlier you have something called as a virtual network. So these are all the components that got created as in when I created my virtual machine instance. And this is my virtual machine, which is called demo VM, and it has a couple of options like activity log, IAM, and all that stuff. We'll talk about that. But yes, any questions till here?
Then don't we have free tier instance type? VM
We
type?
do in a free trial subscription. We do have that, but I'm not too sure on what is the instance type for a free tier. Like it's been a while that I've used it for a free tier. In my case, I don't have because I am using a Visual Studio Professional subscription, so I don't really pay anything. Anything that I use is a free thing out here as such. But
Okay.
yes, in a free trial in a free trial account, we do have free tier instances also, and also after you convert your free trial account to pay as you go, right? Microsoft still offers something like let's say free resources for the next 10 months. So if I say
Okay.
Azure free free trial, so it's telling there about 40 other services that you can always use for free. So if you look at these free services out here, it's telling virtual machine Windows, and this will tell you what is the size. So if you go back here, right? Sorry, if you go back here, it's going to tell you that okay, fine. This is about 750 hours of B1's burstable, let's say, virtual machines out here, which means that you have a B1 size, something called as a B1 or a B2 series of the machines out here. So if you look at the B series, you have your B1s like B1 MS and so on and so forth. There are few. I mean, though you have free instances, the amount of capacity that you can get out of that particular free instance is very small. So if you go here, this is what will tell you on what exactly that you get. So these are the free services that it offers to you for the next 12 months. Though your free trial expires in let's say about uh, 30 days, even after that, you enjoy let's say popular services for the next 12 months out here, wherein it'll tell you these are all the services out here and so on and so forth.
So one other question on the marketplace. We do see the custom images as a preview. I mean, those are not available as
When
an
you go,
as
okay,
an
when you go create a virtual machine, okay, let's do that. And this is what you see. This one,
or images.
this is
The
community
community
images.
images are preview.
Yes,
Direct shared images
but
are preview. These are not general
it,
level GA, right? I mean, these are not
yeah,
GA.
it's not a GA. It's not a GA feature. Community images and direct shared images. These are an options that I'm really seeing out here. So these are something in preview, but your own images, meaning you can go ahead and create your own images.
Yeah,
These
that is
images are
okay.
not in a preview model out here as such. Yes. Any more questions, guys?
So, current virtual network subnet. So virtual network is similar. Something is similar to the LAN or subnet. LAN WAN. We have a local area network, and right. Subnet.
Again, right. See, it is not really comparable to a LAN or a WAN. See, LAN or a WAN is your own network in a physical space out here. But when you talk about a virtual network, it just gives you a space. It just gives you an isolation out here. Because if I compare it to LAN or a WAN, it wouldn't be the right comparison, or it wouldn't be the right scale to compare it. This is just nothing but a space. It's an isolation inside which you're dividing your space into multiple things out here. And here is where your subnet comes into picture. And this is what I was talking about, is that the available IPs right now is 250. Reason being, one IP is given to your network interface card out here as such.
You can assume like a LAN, but it is managed by the Azure service providers.
Right. Again, there
Something
are a lot
similar
of
to that.
technical, yes, there are a lot of technical differences between those things. So that's the reason I wasn't really getting into, let's say, and comparing it with a LAN and so on and so forth.
No, for simplicity to
Yes,
understand it. And so it
you can,
appears
yes,
like
you
a
can,
LAN, and you can have subnets within it.
kind of, yes.
Yeah, Kiran. Hello.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Hello.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah. Yeah. When you are creating that VMs, yeah, it is IPs automatically assigned, or we want to assign that IPs.
When you say IPs are automatically assigned, which IP are you talking about? Is it a public IP or is it a
Yeah. When
private
you
IP you're
creating that
referring?
VMs, the
Sorry,
private IPs only. Private
private
IPs
IP.
only.
Private IP is a dynamic assignment. So I do not have a control on which IP to assign out here. It's a dynamic assignment, but yes, I can change it to a static. We'll talk about that. But when you create it, it's a dynamic assignment out here as such.
So in that
So
case, Azure maintains a DHCP scope for assigning the private IP addresses.
yes, correct.
Yeah. If you one more question, if you yeah, when you creating that VM, we can assign that automatically assign that IP. It is a dynamic. It's okay. When you we created 100 VMs at a time, and it is
Okay.
assigned automatically in 100 VMs. If you want to, we deleted some VMs. That point of time, again we created. What is that scenario to assign that IPs?
Just a second. Just a second. So firstly, you say you created 100 different VMs. So which means
Yeah,
that out of those 251, 100 will be subtracted. You'll have 100 VMs, 100 different private IPs out here. So yes, go forward with the question now. So after that, you deleted VMs, is what you're saying?
yeah.
Okay, you deleted
Some
your VMs.
VMs we deleted.
Okay, so
Yeah,
let's say you deleted 50 VMs. So now you have 50 IPs that are coming back to you, or 50 IPs that are coming
yeah.
back to your subnet. Now, when you create more VMs,
Okay.
it's just going to see what is the available IPs in the pool. It's just going to go ahead into the backend algorithm. So Microsoft has a backend algorithm to understand what are the available IPs in the pool. Just taking those, let's just taking those IPs, it'll just go ahead and assign it to the newly created virtual machines out here until your subnet is full. If your subnet is full, you cannot go ahead and create a machine inside it any anymore. You cannot create new machines inside that particular subnet out here as such.
The
And
scope,
my
I mean,
query
can
is,
we define in?
I'm sorry, can you come again,
Sorry, go
please?
ahead. Go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead, Anil.
please one more question.
Hmm.
Yeah, we created one subnet. We given one subnet, the
Okay,
10.0.0.1, and we
okay,
created up to 100, and
okay,
50 is already deleted. When I'm
okay.
creating that 101 IPs, it's
Hmm.
taken from that one IP or 101 IP,
No,
second time created.
it is not in my control. That's not in your control. It completely depends upon what are the IPs that are really available at that given point in time. So it's not whether it's 101 IP or it's not whether it's 51st IP. It's just the available IP out here. So it's just an address. It's just the available IP from which the allocation is done and given it to you out here as such.
Okay.
Yes, IPs are assigned
Can I?
automatically to the instances. Yes, go ahead, please. Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah, can I define the scope, DHCP scope, or it is?
No, you cannot. Networking is something that you cannot really do it at your end. This is an infrastructure as a service. Your purview of a network is that can I really define a DNS route or can I really define the scope of my network? But when you talk about DHCP, this is something that you really cannot do out here as such.
You cannot reserve also, right? I mean, any IP addresses.
When you say reservation of the IP
DHCP,
addresses,
DHCP reservation. I mean, if you want to have that IP to be assigned to a particular virtual machine, let's say I
okay.
have an application server, I want that IP to be the private IP to be static.
Hmm.
So can I reserve that IP among the pool within the pool?
No, if you delete the machine and recreate the instance back again, no, the reservation will not work in that way.
But
You can make it as a static dynamic. That's something that you can do, but reservation is something that you cannot really do out here as such.
if you shut down reboot, the IP will not change, right? But dynamic IP it can change.
Dynamic IP will change, yes. If it's a static, if you tell that it's a static, it will not. But if it's a dynamic, if you reboot the machine, the chances are that it might change. I'm telling you, it might.
So the IP which is assigned is not static by default, right? I mean, it is
No,
just a
the IP
dynamic
which is
private IP
assigned,
address.
it's a dynamic private IP address amongst the pool.
Or we can set it as a static.
You can set it as a static, but the need is not really there. Reason being, when I want to resolve the IP address of my machine within the network, I won't really take the name of the, or I won't really take the IP address. Rather, I'll go and give the name of my machine, and the DNS resolution is taken care in the background. So that's the reason why I'm not really looking at whether this particular IP is really static or dynamic out here as such.
But the option to set as a static, I mean, what is the use case for that?
Well, if you really want to say that, okay, fine, or I mean, if the option out here to set it as a static, why do you want to really go? If you're not really using the domain name of your machine for some reason, if you're not really, let's say, wanting to use this, you want to directly use your IPs. I mean, let's say your developers are
Right, right,
using
right.
directly the IPs of the
But that
machines.
is bound to change, right? I mean, that is bound to change. It can change.
If it is dynamic,
No,
but
if it
if
is
you want to,
static, if you
no,
want
it is not
to
bound.
set
No,
it.
no, it is not bound to change when it is static. That's the entire definition of static, right?
Oh, okay.
Right. So if it's static, then the scope of it changing, it's not there. But if when it's dynamic, yes, you do not have a control on how the assignment is going around.
So when you set a private IP as static,
Mhm.
even if you reboot, if you shut down and bring it up, so that will not change. The IP will not
That will not
change.
change. Yes, that will not change. Yes, that's correct.
Oh, okay. Okay. Got it.
But if you destroy your machine and recreate it,
Yeah, then
then
IP
that's
is
not in your
lost.
control.
Yeah.
Yes, then the
Yeah.
IP is lost. Yes, any more questions, guys, before I close?
Hello,
Just
sir.
out of the sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Trina.
Then go, please.
Hello, sir.
Mhm.
IP address is automatically connected to desktop or employees, sir.
No, sir. IP
Private IP.
address is no, no,
We
no.
VNet.
This is not for employees. This is for your virtual machines and applications that are running on the cloud. Let me make that very clear. This IP address is not given to your employees. It's not assigned to your employees at all. It is assigned to the
Okay, okay.
machines, and
Yes,
it is
okay.
assigned to the applications or resources that are running on the cloud.
Okay, sir. One employee
Mhm.
outside the organization, how to disconnect AD, sir, Active Directory. This IP address are
Mhm.
automatically disconnected, sir.
No, I'll talk about that. We'll talk about how the connections are established. In that, we can talk about how the disconnection happens and so on and so forth.
Okay, sir. Sir,
Hmm?
IP address is used to connect to data.
IP address is used to connect to that particular machine. When I connect to something, it's connected to that particular resource. Like in my case, connect to this particular machine out here as such.
Okay, okay, sir. Sir, one more question. IP address is we created 256 subnets, sir.
Hmm.
One subnet. We deleted uh, 256 all total 256 not deleted. So we deleted one IP address. How to make it?
Sir, you cannot delete an IP address. So the first thing when you delete an IP address, firstly you cannot delete it because the allocation of the IPs is not in your control. All you're telling is that okay, fine, you know what, I need a subnet. If you want to delete that particular IP address, right, you'll have to delete your entire subnet. And deletion of the entire subnet is only possible when there is no resources attached to that particular subnet. In my case, I cannot delete it. Reason being, I already have a virtual machine attached to it. So
If
you
you
cannot delete
destroy
the
the
IP.
virtual machine, the IP address will get released and it will go back to the pool. And
Yes,
the
it'll go
next
back to the
VM will
pool.
get it.
Yes,
Yeah,
the
that's
next
how it is.
VM in the line will get it. Yes.
So Kiran, one quick question. It is
Hmm.
out of the class that we are talking about.
Sure,
Do
good,
you
please.
have any plans for any advanced Azure architect or any kind of sessions that are coming up?
See, advanced Azure architects is something that I'm not really going into. Reason being, this course is dedicated towards
No, not this
104 and
course. I mean,
400. Mhm.
any
Okay,
course.
no, no. No, Nirmal, I do not have the Azure Architect out here as such. As of now, I'm only rolling out for DevOps out here, but we do not have, let's say, architecture in plan as such out there. But yes, any
Okay.
architectural questions you have, you can go ahead, send out an email, and I'll try my best to go ahead and answer it out back.
No, I wanted to understand on the SSO integrations and all that stuff. So
Okay.
that's
I mean, if you can just send me out an email on the requirement, I can just go ahead and send you the documentation
okay.
keys from where you can go ahead and, let's say, refer it out to.
All right. Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm a little top of the hour right now, guys. So I'll just close the session. We'll take more questions tomorrow and we'll continue with the session out there. Thanks, guys, and have a good day ahead. Thank you.